The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to thank you for joining us today's webinar entitled Strength in Numbers, a Rising Leader's Guide to Getting Involved in Government Relations and Legislative Affairs. I'm Robert Few, the Chairman of the Young Security Professionals Council and the Program Facilitator of the Mentorship Program. I will be here to help facilitate this webinar today. First, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping notes before we get started. All callers will be muted for the duration of this call. Please be sure to use your question log to submit any questions that you have during this presentation. All questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. Additionally, a recording of the webinar will be available in the resource library on the esaweb.org. And for our mentors and mentees, this will also be included in our portal. If you have any questions during this presentation, please type them into the question log and we'll get to them at the end. Now I'd like to introduce John Steele and Chris Heaton. John Steele is a Senior Director of Government Relations for Johnson Controls, handling state and local government affairs. Before joining Johnson Controls, he was the Director of State and Local Affairs for the American Beverage Association. Previous to that position, he served as a press secretary to former U.S. Senator Barbara Maliski on Capitol Hill and in her 1992 re-election campaign. He also worked for former U.S. Senator Bill Bradley of New Jersey and former U.S. Representative Jim Florio of New Jersey and Gary Ackerman of New York. John is a graduate of Rutgers University. Chris Heaton, prior to joining ESA, served as Executive Director of the Texas Municipal Police Association after a 20-year career in law enforcement with the Plano, Texas Police Department. Chris is a past president of the Plano Police Association and Texas Municipal Police Association with 30 years of active engagement in legislative advocacy at a local, state, and federal level. Chris holds a master's degree of public administration from the University of North Texas. John, I'd like to turn this over to you and Chris to walk us through the presentation.
All right, Robert, thank you. And to our participants, welcome and thank you for your time. We trust you'll find this informative, and it's the beginning of the process to be a resource to you all as you either continue or begin your engagement in government relations. And so as we have there from Shannon, thank you, that first slide, which is my member company view of government relations. Shannon, the next slide, please. Thank you. And government relations matters to your business at all levels. And rest assured, is either you know directly or anecdotally that any level of government can either be of benefit to your company or wreak havoc for your company, either through regulation, legislation, on and on, taxation, you name it. And so it's incumbent on you individually and also the ESA state chapters and the national chapters to continue getting engaged with elected officials at the federal level, at the state level, the counties, and the localities. And I'm going to go back up to the top of that list because over the years that I've been in DC, I came to DC in 1985, there's been a relentless devolution of the responsibilities of the federal government. They in turn have pushed it down to the states. The states in turn have pushed many of those responsibilities down to the counties, and the counties in turn have pushed many of those responsibilities onto the localities. So you really are looking at four corners of government that one needs to keep an eye on and engage with because any one of those can be certainly a hindrance to your business on a variety of fronts, but also, not to just dwell on the negative, they can also be of benefit to you in terms of what your company individually wants to achieve or what you want to achieve as part of the industry. And next slide, please, Shannon. Thank you. So we're going to keep this simple because much of this is just the repetition of the exercise. And through this exercise, one becomes more and more comfortable in engaging with elected officials. And I completely understand that in the beginning, one can feel uncomfortable. You're not in a familiar space. You're dealing with people whom you might find, at least in the beginning, to be intimidating. On and on it goes, their staffs, etc. But please understand and rest assured that they work for you. They want to hear from you because, again, it's representative government at all levels. And so it's important that you not only engage with the ESA chapter, which I'll come back to in a moment, but also embrace interacting with elected officials because it's a benefit and it's important. So these keys to success for the moment, I'm going to address as a engaging with the ESA state chapters. First and foremost, as I say, you show up, and you show up consistently, because through your presence, through your regular engagement, your profile is elevated, the value of your participation is elevated, and that becomes its own political currency. So if you're there every time for every meeting and you're engaged and you're a valued member of that team, your ability to influence and to help carry out priorities, not only for your business but for the ASA chapter, increases. So again, there's nothing like showing up every time, because that really matters. Then as an extension of that, get involved and volunteer. Offer to do something, offer to chair a subcommittee, offer to take something on, but first and foremost, get involved, be an active participant, because again, from that comes the value of membership, and that the others in the ESA chapter, for example, will look to you for your participation, because time and again you've shown your own value. Ask questions and speak up. This is participatory, and while the member companies of that given state chapter have common interests, rest assured from time to time there may be interests that aren't shared. And so this is where you ask questions, where you speak up on behalf of your own company to make sure that there is consistency, or if in fact in some instances that ESA state chapter may not be able to advocate for a certain position because there is not agreement within the chapter membership. And having worked for an association years ago, for many years, that oftentimes happens where, okay, we don't have agreement within the membership, therefore we can't take a position. And then it falls back to those individual members to advocate for their own interests. And then update and involve your boss and your company leadership for two primary reasons. One, they need to know that they're getting value out of your participation, because as you wrestle with every day, if you're in that meeting, you're not in the field. So they need to understand the value of you being at that meeting, because either in the immediate or in the long term, it will have impact. It will have bearing on that business you work for. And they need to understand that. And the best way to do that is regular communication, and offer it to them before they ask for it. Just have regular communication with your boss, company leadership, and that's the best way to keep this engagement going, where they actually support you in your engagement in the ESA state chapter. And then, as I put on that last line, you just repeat it, and you repeat it, and you repeat it, all of those above steps. And again, over time, it just becomes much more familiar, and it is something that you'll come to enjoy. Not that you won't enjoy it in the beginning, but it'll be unfamiliar. But again, over time, then it is something that you'll enjoy having taken on. And in fact, that may lead to you wanting to pursue a leadership position within the state chapter, et cetera, et cetera. And so next slide, please, Shannon. So this is a key instruction right now, which is getting to know your elected officials. And you want to know them before you need them. And what I mean by that is, it's difficult to introduce yourself to a legislator and at the same time asking for their help with a problem, because oftentimes it's just the two just aren't going to fit. They just aren't going to work at the same time. So the best thing to do with elected officials is take the time to meet them before you need their help, whether it's to fight something or to support something. But nonetheless, once you're a known entity, because you are a constituent company, meaning that you are a business in their district, you matter to them. They want to learn more about your business, because your business is jobs. And whether you're at the federal level, at the state level, the county level, or the local level, first and foremost, it's about jobs, beginning, middle, and end. And so the fact that you're an employer and you work for an employer, that's gold to them. So you want to get out there and you want to engage with them when you can just have a low-key conversation and you're introducing yourselves to one another. Have them out to the facility for a tour, or you can meet with them when they're back in the district office, and they're much more laid back and they have much more time to engage with you when they're not in the state legislature. That's not to say do not go to the state capitol and meet with them. But what it does say is to underscore the value and the benefit of meeting with them back in the district, back where you live, for them to then begin to build that relationship with you. And what I do recommend that you do is to look at the latter half of this calendar year, because come Memorial Day, most of these state capitals, not all of them, but most of them, will have wrapped it up and they've gone home. They will have adjourned. And then they're back in the district and they return to their lives in terms of whatever else they do as legislators, real estate agents, accountants, you name it, whatever the case may be. But there's time for them to meet with you and take advantage of that. So what you want to be able to do is when 2018 comes and there's a legislative issue, whether, again, risk or opportunity, and you need their help and you need the help of their staff, they're known to you and they'll be much more inclined to quickly take your call. They understand what you're talking about because they've seen the business, they've walked your business, they've learned about your business, and so you're much more ahead of the game if you establish those relationships, start that root system now than if you wait until 2018 and you actually need something. And again, ESA does a great job of helping on this, so Chris Heaton, who's also on the call, can be a resource to you in terms of learning how best to do that, to introduce yourself. But again, don't make it bigger than it needs to be. It's simple human interaction. These legislators and their staff want to hear about what's going on in your business because it's a critical part of their district and that matters to them. And Shannon, next slide, please. So the takeaway for you all is what I've talked about in those previous slides, but also understand that you can't do this alone. You need your fellow ESA state chapter members. You'll need to work with others who care about what you care about, at least on this issue, and then down the road you may come together again on a similar issue. But nonetheless, you'll find that you'll need allies to be able to prevail and get what you want. And that's not only the state chapter, but it's also working with the national chapter, which is represented by Chris Heaton on this call. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris. And again, if you all have any questions of me, I'm more than happy to answer them at the end of the session. So thank you for listening, and I hope you found this useful. And Chris, I turn over to you now.
Thank you, Don. I want to start with how ESA monitors all these bills. I was just looking on a sheet that we have from our tracking service. Approximately 162,000 bills will be introduced or carried over this year. And how do we call that to a manageable level? Well, ESA and many of our national company members use tracking services that look for keywords, search terms, and concepts to try to data mine those bills and identify the bills that are germane to the industry. And that's one of the things that we do that's an invaluable service because it allows us to identify these bills when they're introduced, the regulatory impact that these bills will have, and how they have a potential impact on your business, from taxation to regulation to low voltage to apprenticeship and a whole host of other subject areas that we monitor. We provide this information as a tool for our members. We will push information to our chapters. We have 31 charter chapters in ESA, and for those states that we do not have chapters in, we'll push the information directly to our members in that state to make them aware of bills that are introduced that have a potential impact on their industry. And Shannon, go ahead and go to the next slide. So what I want to talk about right now is ESA's Day on Capitol Hill. How does it work, and what value it brings for our members? Obviously, this is our fly-in event for ESA members at the federal level. When you have the opportunity to meet with the members of the congressional delegation in your state, and that's a valuable in itself. It goes back to what John said, which is get to know them before you need their help. Identify particularly members of Congress in your delegation who work on particular committees or subcommittees that will touch on our industry, the Business and Commerce, Ways and Means, or any other committee were bills of interest to ESA, and we'll be talking about the three issue areas that we're going to be discussing in a little bit here. But it's important, whether it's in Congress or it's at the state capitol, to take advantage of those opportunities to meet with your members, your elected representatives. It's also an opportunity to bring about awareness of the industry to the congressional delegation. Who is the Electronic Security Association? What do you guys do? Well, obviously, we're the Burglar and Fire Alarm, formerly the National Burglar and Fire Alarm Association, but we're much more than that. Technology is evolving at such a rapid pace. it's almost impossible to keep up with some of the changes, and so it involves a whole host of other technologies, the integrated systems and things of this nature that our members are involved in, personal emergency response systems and the like. So we want to make sure that the members of Congress, and even if you only get the opportunity to meet with staffers, that's important on a number of different levels because you have a point of contact within a particular congressman's office. It's also an opportunity when you go today on Capitol Hill to see how Washington really works. Walking through the Sam Rayburn building seems like just a monolith of a building. It's hallways that never end, and you know, crowded congressional offices. You may end up meeting in a hallway, talking to a staffer, or going into a broom closet with a desk. There's no telling. It's a very, very hectic time. There's a number of different constituencies that are there to meet with their particular delegation as well, and a whole host of different issues. We have a very organized plan of action. We give them a short, simple synopsis of what our topic areas are, a leave behind packet, so that they can study the issue later. The primary point is for you to meet those members of the delegations from your state and to do some follow-up with them, preferably afterwards. It's also a great opportunity to meet and network with your peers. You may meet some other folks from your state there, and it's a good opportunity to talk with them about the issues that are going on in your state. And it's obviously a chance to become more educated on the important federal issues that impact the industry and how those federal issues can impact you at the state level, which we'll be talking about here. If we'll go on to the next slide. The three topic areas that we are going to be discussing, and of course there are many more important issues than these three, but we don't want to inundate our congressional offices with a whole smorgasbord of issues, so we try to limit it to three top issues that are brewing in Congress right now, and one of those is the telecommunication policies. We know that the Telecommunication Act of 1996 is up for a revision. There's been a tremendous amount of discussion about this act in Congress and in the Federal Communications Commission and over the last several years. And we don't know for sure that a comprehensive rewrite of the Telecommunications Act is in order. But if there is, we want to make sure that some of the protections for the alarm industry, specifically what's known as Section 275, are kept in a rewrite of the Telecommunications Act. Now, what does Section 275 do? Well, one of the key components of that section was that it prohibits the discriminatory practices by telecommunication providers, that is, anti-competitive practices, because they own the pipes that the communication pathways come through. They are also, our members are also customers of those telecommunication providers who are now in the electronic security marketplace. So they wanted to make sure that that it's a fair and level playing field with regard to the alarm companies who use the same communication pathways that the telecommunication providers use. So we wanted to have prohibit the discriminatory practices. We also want to prohibit the data mining of electronic security and life safety customer data. Obviously, for marketing purposes or whatever, they have access to your customer information, and we wanted to make sure that that is prohibited by the federal law. And we also wanted to make sure that expedited complaint proceedings for alleged violations of the first two are kept in place so that you don't get drowned in the quagmire of bureaucratic red tape if you are damaged by a telecommunication, a local exchange provider, or whoever it may be. So those are the three. That was the telecommunications policy. The second issue is a balanced approach to the fire system design, and that is providing, many of you are probably familiar with the Section 179 that allows you to expense what would be depreciation a depreciation deduction that you would have to expense over 15 years or whatever the life of a particular capital expenditure was. And what this bill does, one of the bills that's introduced by Susan Collins, Senate Bill 602, is called the Fire Sprinkler Incentive Act, adds fire sprinkler systems to the type of property that can be expensed under Section 179 of the tax code, and allow you to depreciate the full expense of that on the year that particular system was placed into service. What we are asking is that the fire detection systems be added to that bill. It's a good bill, but there's a need for a balanced approach, because we know that that fire system detection with suppression greatly increases the risk, or greatly reduces the risk of dying in a fire, up to 82% when compared to a residence without either system. So it's important for the balanced approach for the deduction to be available for fire detection as well as fire suppression systems, and so we will be discussing that during our visit. And the third issue is the support for the Career and Technical Education Bill. This is a continuation, a reauthorization, we believe, will be introduced this year to what was originally passed in 1984, known as the Carl D. Perkins Vocational and Technical Education Act. As many of you are probably aware, workforce development is a looming and serious problem in many sectors of our industry, and there's a need for us to continue finding ways to develop people interested in getting involved in coming into this industry, and it begins at high school. And some of the funding for the development, for workforce development programs at the state level comes through federal grants, and the Perkins Act is one of those bills that provides the funding for career and technical education with pass-through grants at the state level. And so we will be working to educate members of Congress on that issue as well. Okay, so what are we going to be doing during Day on Capitol Hill? Shannon, if you go to the next slide. Here is a schedule of the events. So on Tuesday, May 16th, of course, you'll have registration. There'll be a chapter president's meeting from 2:30 to 3:30, and then we're going to have a government relations committee meeting. It's not going to be a closed meeting, so if you arrive early enough and you want to sit in on the government relations committee meeting, you're welcome to. And then there will be a reception hosted, sponsored by Honeywell from 5:30 to 6:30 on Tuesday. Then we start bright and early on Wednesday with a breakfast from 7:30 to 8:30, and I believe John Schwat, our government relations contractor, will be providing a briefing on how the process will work, and he will provide handouts. And I don't know if he's going to be handing out the handouts for your visit to Capitol Hill that morning, or if it's going to be done during registration. But you will have a handout with your assigned congressional delegations that you will go visit during the morning and the afternoon. And after breakfast, we'll go to the various congressional offices. Everybody will be assigned, as I mentioned, and you'll have those congressional visits from 9:30 to about 12, and then we return to the Capitol Hill Club for lunch, and sponsored by Axis, Telguard, and Annixter, as you can see on the schedule there. And for the next half, Shannon, to the next slide, we will go back for more congressional visits. Again, these will be on your schedule, and with instructions on how to get to your particular locations. And hopefully you'll be completed with all your congressional visits by 4:30. And we'll return to the hotel, and we'll every delegation that went on congressional visits, we'll go back and debrief with John Schwat, discuss who you had meetings with and the outcomes of those meetings. And then we will have a Diamond Reception and Dinner sponsored by Interlogics from 5:30 to 8:30 at the Hyatt, and that will conclude the day on Capitol Hill. So it's people who I've been going to this event for the last 5 years, and this is the people who go, especially those who go for the very first time, are just, I wouldn't say, I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, but some of them are just awestruck by the process and by seeing Washington D.C. and seeing how Congress works and the hectic pace, and seeing all the people that you see on TV, on the nightly news on a regular basis, just walking down the hallway. It's pretty interesting to see that for the first time. And like John mentioned earlier, don't be overwhelmed about those people or about the process or about the size of the buildings or whatever. It's more important to understand as you're walking through there, these people work for you, and it's a great opportunity to meet them and to have a point of contact, like I said, and that's the point, the primary point of this event. So that is it for Day on Capitol Hill, and we'd be happy to entertain any questions about the process and any issue that you have, whether it's with the state or local level or with Day on Capitol Hill. We'd be happy to entertain any questions anybody has.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that, and thank you, John, for everything you provided. I will say that having gone to Capitol Hill at the last time was my first time, and it definitely was inspiring, and it was just a great event to get introduced to that world. So Shannon, we'll kick it over to you, and any questions that have come in. Again, encourage everybody to ask your questions through that question log.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. So we do have one question, and it is surrounding Day on Capitol Hill. And the question is, what is the cost of going to Day on Capitol Hill, and what does that include? Chris, did you want to take that, or would you like me to?
You probably are more familiar with those specifics, Shannon, so go ahead.
Sure, no problem. So Day on Capitol Hill is actually free for all ESA members. We were hoping to actually have all registrants confirmed by last Friday, but if any of you are on the call and you are interested in coming, please contact us right away. If you go to esaweb.org/DOCH, you can actually click on the registration link. It is still set up to be free for you as a member of the association, and it includes pretty much everything that Chris actually covered in the schedule. So all of your food and beverage at events like the Diamond Reception and Dinner, the breakfast, the lunch on Wednesday, and then also on Tuesday, the Platinum Reception as well. So there's a lot of the food and beverage that's covered for you, and there's, as I mentioned, no registration cost. And as Chris also mentioned, we really do all of the heavy lifting for you in terms of scheduling of all of the appointments and setting up all of that in advance so that you have all of those details, which is why it's really important, if you are interested in coming, just to make sure that we're aware right away, because we do need to get going on scheduling all of your appointments and making sure that you have everything that you need before you get there. So I think that probably covers that question. The next question is, how much time or investment does a company need to dedicate to government relations efforts to be effective? And I will let any of you gentlemen pick that one up.
This is John. I'll answer it, and then Chris, turn it over to you. Certainly at the state and local level, first and foremost, participate in the quarterly or monthly, whatever the schedule is, those state ESA chapter meetings, and then as I recommended as part of my presentation, take it upon yourself at the right time relative to their schedule and your schedule to meet your own elected officials, state rep, state senator, the mayor, the city council member who represents you, possibly your county executive, but again, have them out for a tour of the facility or go meet them in your office. So the bottom line is it does not take a lot of time. It is periodic, but by no means is it daily, weekly, or monthly for that matter, but it is periodic in a given quarter. But Chris, I turn over to you as well, please.
Certainly, it really is going to depend on whether or not you have what I used to refer to as a focusing event. I'll give you one example. It was a couple of years ago, Kentucky chapter was essentially dormant. We couldn't get a quorum of 3 members of the board of directors together on a phone call to pass a meeting to change the bylaws to help them reconstitute their chapter. Then about February of 2015, the Department of Housing and Building Construction issued proposed regulations based on a law that was written 10 years earlier that allowed them to regulate the low voltage industry by statute, but they never got around to doing it. Well, they finally got around to doing it, but they didn't engage the low voltage industry in these proposed regulations. And after reading the first draft, it became pretty clear to us and to the people who were engaged that this could end people's businesses in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We immobilized immediately, got our members engaged, and I flew into Louisville for an organizational meeting with the membership, and we had understand I said we couldn't get 3 board members on a phone call at one point. I had 60 members at this meeting in Louisville after we got the word out. So obviously you don't want to have to be reactive like that. If you're engaged with the state, whatever the regulatory body is that's involved that handles licensing in your state. Hopefully, if you're in a state that's got a state chapter, the state chapter is engaged with those regulatory bodies. They'll often bring representatives for those regulatory bodies in for your lunch and learns. Always take advantage of those types of events. It's just a chance to get to know those people and ask questions and hear other people's questions answered and gain some insight. Same thing at the local level. We occasionally face alarm ordinances that that would implement verified response policies or no response policies, and obviously those have to be addressed. We even had cities that tried to implement and have implemented finding alarm companies as a default for false alarms rather than the customers. And so those are things that have to be addressed, but it's always better to try to address them proactively rather than reactively. And so if you invest a little time, just like John mentioned, get to know them before you need them. If you invest a little bit of time at the local level and going to your state capital and maybe shadowing the GR guy who does go to the Capitol on a regular basis, because he just gets, he's just very involved in the legislative process. We have several volunteer leaders who are regularly at their state capitol, and if you contact me, I can steer you to who that person may be in your state if there is one. And you can just shadow them and go and meet with representatives and go to the state capitol. It may take a day out of your schedule once, 1 month, but it's a chance for you to learn the process a little bit better so that you can have some understanding of how it works before you need it, and before that big punch hits you in the gut that could impact your business model.
Thanks, Chris. So, Robert, I don't actually have any other questions at the moment, so I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, John and Chris, for providing all the information that you've shared with us today. Thank you, Shannon, for controlling the slides. And finally, I'd like to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint presentation will be available in our resource library on esaweb.org. Thank you all for participating today. We appreciate your time and hope you found the content useful. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll sign off from there. Thank you.